हरि ओम। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देवा सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste friends. Welcome to session 129 of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. In today's session, we will revisit the entire 17th chapter to consolidate our understanding. After the recap, Kumari Narayani is going to chant Sharada Dvadasha Namani. Now, to start with, Dr. Sundar sir will give us an introduction of today's class. Over to you, Sundar sir.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. We have now reached the final concluding chapter of this great text. The last six chapters, which are called as the Charama Shatakam or the Antima Shatakam, comprises of the highest wisdom that is there in the Bhagavadgita, in the entire Advaita Vedanta itself, especially the chapters 13th, 14th, and 15th. These chapters deal with the ultimate goal of our life. They teach us how to become the best version of ourselves. This goal of life, Lord Krishna feels that Arjuna, who represents all of us, can be reached by consolidating the fundamentals, the means to reach to this goal. So we can say that there is a way of life. If we have lived well, then we can easily attain to this goal of life. This whole design is in the form of a step ladder or the staircase. So we see the Veda Purva Bhaga dealing with the way of life, and the Vedanta portion, the essence of which is captured in this 13th, 14th, and 15th, dealing with the goal of life. Put other way, the Karma Kanda deals with the way of life, and the Jnana Kanda deals with the goal of life. Lord Krishna feels that he has taught Arjuna enough about the goal of life, and he feels the necessity to teach once again the complementary means to attain to this goal. In the beginning of the 16th chapter, we saw a beautiful analysis done by Pujya Swami Paramarthananda ji, where he discusses about two value systems we can have: the material value system and the spiritual value system. So one can have a Dvesha, Himsa, Krodha, Pradhana Swabhava driven by Tamoguna, by which one can earn what is called Rakshasi Sampat, which will cause a spiritual downfall. So obviously this is not the proper way of life. We should avoid this. Swamiji also describes Raga, Kama, Pradhana Swabhava driven by Rajoguna, where one earns what is called Asuri Sampat. This is also not the way of life for us because there is spiritual stagnation. So the message for us is Tamo Rajoguna driven material value system is not the way of life for us. The way of life for us then is presented in the form of a spiritual value system. So here Jnana Pradhana Swabhava driven by Sattva Guna makes us earn what is called as Daivi Sampat. And this is beneficial for our seekers because this causes spiritual upliftment. So this then is the way of life, which then leads on to the goal of life described in those three chapters. The goal is in the form of knowledge or awareness. We in our lives come across various types of knowledges. There are many peculiarities regarding self-knowledge, but one of the peculiarities is important in the context of what we are discussing now. For all other knowledge, like medicine knowledge or mathematics knowledge, how I've lived my life does not matter. Irrespective of how I've lived, I can still be brilliant at that knowledge. But for the knowledge described in Vedanta, for self-knowledge, the way of life is important because it is the means for this knowledge. This is so because the spiritual knowledge happens in a mind, a particular type of mindset, and the way of life changes our mindset by changing our thinking pattern brick by brick. So then the question arises, how to know what is the correct way of life? So we had this verse in the end of the previous chapter, which said that the scriptures, the Shastram, tells us the right from wrong. So then the message is to follow the scriptures. This leads to the first question, the opening question of this chapter, because Arjuna feels a person may be well-intentioned, he may be religious, but he may not have got exposure to scriptures. How then are we to categorize the worship of this person? So this is the opening question for this chapter. We can have an overview of this chapter. This chapter starts with that question from Arjuna. This gives Lord Krishna an opportunity to categorize worship based on the gunas into three types. On his own, then Lord Krishna goes to categorize four other items, ahara, yajna, tapas, and dhanam, based on the three gunas, as to what is sattva, rajas, and tamas of all these. The idea is to prepare us to move from the material value system because they form a means for us to attain to the goal which was described earlier. This chapter also deals with the significance of this mantra Om Tat Sat. This mantra is associated with the commencement of Yajna, Tapas, and Dhanam. Therefore, Lord Krishna explains to us about this mantra. With this background, let us go to the first section in this chapter. Over to you, Sandhya Madam.
Thank you, Dr. Sundar. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This is verses 1 to 7 of chapter 17. The last two verses of the 16th chapter drove home the idea that Shastram is fundamental to spiritual progress. This is sort of overwhelming for an average person who is not well versed or does not have access to the scriptural knowledge. And how can he use Shastram as a ready reckoner for spiritual progress when this is the case? Like Arjuna, many of us are desirous of living the Gita way of life. And we are left wondering if we can do it with Shraddha alone or a knowledge of the scriptures is also essential. Chapter 17 opens with this doubt of Arjuna. Is it not enough if we conduct ourselves well, if we have noble aspirations, if we live a life with Shraddha or faith? Is it necessary that we must know the Shastras also? So Krishna more than once has emphasized that Shraddha is necessary for wisdom. Next slide, please. In chapter 4, verse 39, he says, Shraddhavan labate Jnanam. It is necessary for Jnanam. So what is this Shraddha? When we loosely translate it as faith, it's not just blind belief. It is our inner aspiration, which is within us to gain this wisdom, or Jnanam. Jnanam, as we know, is that which is free from doubt, knowledge which is free from doubt, as opposed to intellectual knowledge, which is fraught with doubt and skepticism. This Shraddha is governed by our inherent nature, that is Swabhavaja. It is governed by the three gunas, and it conforms to our temperament or our mental constitution. This is Sattvanurupa Shraddha Mayoyam, as we will see in the verses to follow. It is determined by our Purva Janma Vasanas. Although we talk about, from a science point of view of genetics, epigenetics, is Purva Janma Vasana part of that? We don't know. But definitely it plays a very important role in the character and the personality of a person. And what is most important is that it is not visible. Just by looking at a person, you cannot say what kind of a Shraddha he or she has. It has to be inferred. So our thoughts, words, actions, habits, character determine the personality of this person, who actually becomes the product of this Shraddha. That is, I am Purushaha. Swami Paramarthananda ji emphasizes the importance of the right kind of nurturing of spiritual values from childhood in order to develop a Satvika Shraddha. Now getting back to Arjuna's question. Ye shastram vidhim utsrijya yajante shraddhayanvita tesham nishtatu ka Krishna satvamaho rajastamaha. So he asks, what of those who set aside the scriptural ordinance and perform sacrifice with faith? Are they sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? When we look at, the verse 23 of chapter 16 and the first verse in chapter 17, both of them begin the same way. So chapter 16 says, Vartate kamakarataha. And chapter 17 says, Yajante shraddhanvitaha. Both without, who are, one refers to those who disdainfully flaunt with no regard for the Shastra. The second talks about those who regard them through ignorance or lack of knowledge, the so-called spiritually ignorant people. They may do things with dedication for a greater good, but where exactly do they stand? Because they have no knowledge of the scriptures. As usual, Krishna, instead of directly answering the question, goes on to give a discourse on Shraddha, Ahara, Yajna, Tapas, and Dana. Krishna classifies Shraddha into 3 types and points out that it is this Shraddha which determines the character of a man. We are vastly different from each other, and the more we observe the differences, the more we wonder why it should be so. The faith of the embodied, in the next verse, he says, the faith of the embodied, Dehinam, is threefold, which is inherent in one's nature, which may be sattvic, pure, passionate or rajasic, and dull or tamasic. And all this is the fruit of the vasanas that we acquire through various births. And that determines the nature of our activities, intellect, and behavior. The faith of all men conforms to their temperament or mental state. That is, Shraddha Mayoyam Purusho, according to his own nature of the 3 gunas, Sattva, Nurupa. And one of the gunas gains predominance over the other. It becomes the more dominant of the 3. And Sattvam here, Swami Paramarthananda points out, is the mindset and not the guna. Moving on, Shraddha, as we know, can only be inferred. It's not perceptible otherwise. It's inferred from the type of activity that a person engages in. And here Krishna talks about worship or puja. He says, he takes puja as the example and says it can be inferred from the type of devatas that a person worships, the manner of, the motive with which he or she worships these devatas, and the manner of worship. So as you can see, the Sattvic people worship the devas. And what is their motive? Dharma and moksha. So the worship is primarily for spiritual growth, progress. And the manner of worship is they are turned inwards. So it's more mental. And they ask for Jnana Vairagya Siddhyartham. The Rajasic people, on the other hand, worship yakshas and rakshasas mainly for material well-being. Artha and kama is their motive. And the manner of worship is ritualistic, heavily extroverted, lot of pomp and show, and very obvious. And the Tamasic people worship pretas and bhutas. Their motive is primarily adharmic, practiced involving a lot of negative practices for destruction of others. And the manner of worship is very violent, sometimes including bodily torture, walking into fire, piercing themselves, etc. Moving on to the next slide. The 5th and the 6th verses decry those who practice austere penance that is not sanctioned by the scriptures, that is ashastra vihitam. Gora tapas sharira bhuta gramam karshayantaha. That is, the people who worship, who undertake this kind of worship, they torture all the elements in the body. And what kind of, the motive is mainly done for dhamba, hankara, samyukta, for pride, vanity, and to satisfy their ego. And kamaraga balanvitaha, their desires mainly for worldly things and power. So we have the famous examples of the Rakshasas like Hiranyakashpu and Ravana, who illustrate this kind of a tapas, all for negative causes. Sri Krishna says, by doing this kind of a worship, they not only torture themselves, but they also torture the Bhagavan within. The message here is that the shift we must make for the refinement of our personality, from the tamasic to the tamasic and rajasic type to the sattvic type of Shraddha. Next, in conclusion, the next slide, please. The 7th verse calls upon Arjuna to hear about the 3 types of food: sacrifice, tapas, and dana, that define a person, which will be described in the coming verses. Hari Om, thank you.
Thank you, madam. So we need to shift from tamasic and rajasic, which represents the material value system, which will not allow us to go to the goal of life, to sattvic. So we need to worship the proper deity with a proper motive and with a proper mode. We'll now go to the next. Over to you, Ulas.
Thank you. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So Krishna has already answered Arjuna's question about Shraddha and that it is of 3 types. But then now he will go ahead and again talk about a few more things about food, ahara, dana, tapas, and yajna also. And then he'll say those are also of 3 types: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. So let's just do a little bit of repetition or revision about what Shraddha is. Teacher says that Shraddha is something that we really need when we are chartering into unknown waters. So Lord and scriptures are needed because here we are getting into something which we don't have that first-hand experience of yet. So, and in that also Shraddha is of different types based on what is my mental makeup, what is my mental attitude, what is it that I'm trying to achieve. So if I'm trying to achieve my spiritual goal and I'm using Lord and spiritual progress and I'm using Lord and scriptures for that, then my Shraddha is sattvic. If all I want is material benefits and I'm using Lord and scriptures for that, and I'm mostly action oriented, then it is rajasic. And if I'm using them to actually hurt others, then it is tamasic. So in the next slide, we see that in the next 3 verses, he's going to talk about the first verse. The 8th verse is talking about what type of a diet a sattvic person likes. And then in the next one, 9th, he will talk about what a rajasic person likes. And then in the 10th one, what a tamasic person likes. And the idea is that we should increase as much as we can of our sattvic component. We should try to minimize as much as possible the rajasic one and avoid totally whatever is in the tamasic area of it. In the next slide, we see that everything that our scriptures teach, they say that all the activities that we do, right, we have to make them like a ritual. So what is an awakened person versus what is a person who are like us, who are still in dreams? So a person is called in dream if they're just following their instincts. Whatever I like, I just keep doing that. So we are amongst those yet, but we need to get into the discriminative part of it, that we are doing only what is Shreyas rather than Preyas. So that is when we become awakened. So when we are doing even the most basic activities like breathing or eating, those are also considered as, if we do it in a ritualistic fashion, then we are very much aware of what we are doing, and then it really impacts our spiritual growth. So for example, in the food, and food is not just what we are taking in our mouth, right? It's anything that we consume through our senses, what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm touching, tasting, and all those things. So, and all those things have to be very much regulated. So now here, specifically taking the example of food, is we have to see what is the source. Where is this whole food coming from? What is the attitude of that farmer or the distributor or the person who's actually cooking? That's why earlier days, people did not used to eat outside in restaurants because they never know what is the attitude of that person. In our homes, generally, Moms would be chanting Lord's name, and there'll be very much love and compassion. So that is also very important, because that goes into the food also. Jaisa ann vaisa man. And then what is the quality of that food? And scriptures are ask us to avoid non-vegetarian food and all the intoxicants, no liquid spirituality or drugs or anything like that. And then the another important thing is how much to eat. It should not be that we are eating over our capacity, that okay, I cannot eat any more. Instead, there is always said that you should have a little bit of hunger left in you. So these are the things that we have to take care of when we are even eating food. It's not just a very mundane activity. We have to be aware about what we are eating. That's how it is going to help us in our spiritual progress, which is our ultimate goal. And then another thing is not just the attitude of the people who are making the food and how it is being served, etc., but it has to be a very reverential attitude of how we are even consuming it. If you are watching TV or some other serial, etc., and then watching it, then our whole attention is there but not on the food, whereas it should be eaten as if like it's a prasad. We are actually nurturing and nourishing our body. And it has the thing is like there in food there are three components. One is the gross component, one is madhyama, and one is subtle. The gross is the one that just gets discarded. The madhyama is the one which is like fats and carbohydrates and proteins and minerals and all, which actually nourishes the physical part of the body. The subtle part is also very important, the sukshma part of the food, which actually nourishes our mind. How it is going to be, whether it's going to be a calm mind or whether it is going to be a very restless mind, completely depends upon the sukshma part of that food. Now let's exactly see what are these type of diets in the 3 verses that is being told. In the next slide, we see that what is a type of food that a sattvic person likes, or what is a sattvic diet? Something that will increase longevity, ayu, that will increase my physical and mental strength. It'll actually make me more healthy. Rather than eating some kind of a junk food which does not have any nourishment, I'm eating something which is very healthy. And health does not mean just free from diseases, but actually wellness. It should be something which is comforting and pleasing. It should not be that I eat today and then tomorrow morning I'm all in trouble. So it should be very comforting and pleasing. Delicious, one way it could mean that it is very sweet. Sweet food is considered generally sattvic and in our culture, but doesn't mean again that you go it out of moderation. It has to be in moderation, and it should not be very dry. So a little bit of oil and ghee are prescribed, and then it has to be nourishing and pleasing. Then in the next slide, we see that the rajasic food is something that all the other tastes other than the sweet taste, which is actually sattvic, if there is any excess, the keyword is excess of all the other tastes, then it becomes a rajasic food, whether it is very bitter, hot, spicy, salty, sour, which is giving me a burning sensation. What happens is like these might appear very tasty in the short run or right now when I'm eating, but in long term, they have very negative impacts. We get ulcers or some other diseases and things like that. So we need to avoid that. And then the last one in the next slide is about the tamasic diet, which is whether it is undercooked or overcooked, that the entire nourishment has gone, or it even doesn't even have any, like all the chips and cokes and this and that, which does not have really any nourishment. Some food which is like old, which was prepared, let's say last night, and I'm eating tomorrow morning, and then or it is kind of a leftover, whether I ate half dosa in the morning and I'm eating the leftover in the evening, and then or else I'm eating somebody's leftover. Ultimately, something which is impure or which I would not offer to the Lord, I should not offer it to myself also, because again, the idea is that inside me also there is a Lord. So only the food that I can offer to the Lord is something which I should be offering to myself. So these are the different types of diets by which you can again see, like, what is my inclination or proclivity. So that's it. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thanks, Ullas. So in short, the sattvic ahara looks at a more long-term position. What can increase my life, increase mental, physical strength. Whereas the rajasic might appear good in the short term, it might push me to activity, but it can cause problems. And tamasic is one which is casually eaten without seeing whether it is freshly cooked or cooked properly. And also an interesting thing there is what is not offered to the Lord becomes tamasic. We'll now go to the next. Over to you, madam.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This is a recap of verses 11 to 13. And the topic here is the 3 types of yajna. What is meant by the word yajna? In the Vedic tradition, there is no distinction between secular and sacred karma. By inculcating the bhavana of dedicating all our actions to the Lord, all our karmas become yajna or Ishvara Aradhana. Yajna could be sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. If all our activities, physical, mental, or verbal, could simultaneously nourish spiritual growth, they become nishkama karmani or pancha mahayajnas, and here Krishna calls them vidhi drishta karmani. These karmas not only contribute to nature and society, but they impart a latent, a very subtle benefit. That is, one automatically acquires Daivi Sampat and Chitta Shuddhi. Sattvika yajnas, which are called Pancha Maha yajnas, are mandatory. But one's attitude depends on his maturity. A beginner does them to avoid Pratyavaya Papam. Some seek Laukika Palani here, Iha, or in the Swargaloka. But for a spiritual seeker, it is Sadhana Chatushtaya Siddhyartha, leading to Jnana Yogyata, Guru Prapti, and with Shravana Manana Nidithyasana, he becomes a Jnana Nishta anchored in the binary format. This verse 11 describes Sattvika Yajna, which is essentially Karma Yoga. Krishna defines this Yajna as a Palakanksha Bhi, means without desiring benefit. Phalam means benefit, and Akankshi Bhi means desirous. Vidhi Drishtaha means prescribed by the scriptures. Yashtavyam Eva means mandatory karmas. Next slide, please. Mana Samadhaya, meaning to be performed with commitment and not mechanically. So, Sattvika Yajna, we see, uplifts the society, is in harmony with nature, and gives Chitta Shuddhi. Phalam is in the very performance. We see Karmananda replaces Karma Phala Ananda. Here, every activity is converted into a puja. As Krishna says, Yat karoshi, yadashnashi, yajjuhoshi dadasi yat, yat tapasyasi kaunteya, tat kurushva mad arpanam. Verse 12 describes Rajasic Yajna or Sakama Karmani. Krishna says this is performed abhisandhaya, meaning with expectation of tangible benefits like name, fame, money, and so on. Selfish activity is Rajasic Yajna. The focus is not on what I give, but on what I get. Now, how could we manage these expectations? We have two options. One is avoid all expectations in life, or else convert them into non-binding expectations, meaning fulfilled or not, no disturbance. Verse 13 describes Tamasic Yajna. Here, all conditions prescribed for Yajna are uniformly violated as follows. First, Vidhi Heenam means performed diagonally opposite to scriptural instructions. Second, Ashrishta Annam means Annadhana Rahita Yajnam. Food is not cooked and distributed to the involved people and others. Third, Mantra Heenam, meaning deficient with respect to Vedic chanting. Either there is no chanting, wrong pronunciation, or wrong accent. Adakshinam, meaning inappropriate or inadequate dakshina. Remember, Vaidika Rakshana is Veda Rakshanam. And finally, Shraddha Virahitam, meaning lack of faith. The message for us is become a karma yogi, give up tamasic yajna, reduce rajasic yajna, and increase sattvic yajna. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. So the message again is the right way of life is whenever we do any yajna, avoid tamasic and rajasic yajna and consciously see that we performing in a sattvic manner. So the main distinctive feature is to do yajna without expecting a result, which stands out in the sattvika yajna. Whereas we see that the rajasic yajna is done for the sake of the result, and the tamasic yajna is done flouting the rules in the scriptural injunction. Over to the next set of topics now.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. In the verses 16 to 17 of chapter 17 of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna mainly talks about tapas. In the next slide. In the context of these verses, any form of discipline, especially religious or spiritual discipline that we practice is called tapas or austerity, also known as discipline. Sincere and steady practice of the tapas helps us in our spiritual path to discover our essential nature, which is the ultimate truth. Here, tapas has been classified into two categories, instrument or organ-based tapas and guna-based tapas. In the next slide, Krishna addresses the following in the instrument or organ-based tapas, that is types of kaika or physical discipline, then vachikam or verbal discipline, and finally manasam or mental discipline. In the next slide, further elaborating on physical discipline, this discipline pertains to the body. Krishna talks about the different types of physical disciplines. First and foremost is rituals. Rituals are important to remove laziness from the body, which is the tamasic behavior. Rituals are also the most beautiful method of reviving our relationship with the Lord, which is the eternal relationship. This relationship with the Lord is expressed in the form of rituals. To name a few of the rituals, worship of Deva or God, that is formless God represented in the form of idol or Ishtadevata. Then Dvija, that is one who is well versed with and follows the scriptures. Then it is Guru, one who guides us in the spiritual path. Then finally Prajna, one who has got the knowledge of the self and also adoring them. Next is Shaucham, which is cleanliness in all aspects, followed by Arjavam, straightforwardness. Then Brahmacharya means self-restraint, that is withdrawing the outgoing mind or outward mind to contemplate on the self or Brahman. Finally, ahimsa, that is non-violence of people and also the things we handle. In the next slide, Krishna now goes on to discuss verbal discipline. Verbal discipline pertains to organ of speech. We need to make sure that whatever we utter is responsible and not hurtful to others. The shloka further classifies verbal output into 4 parameters that have to be observed before we speak, which helps in improving the quality of speech. These are anudvegakaram, which is not to hurt people by our talk, satyam, that is speak truth. There should be harmony with what we think and what we speak. Then it is priyam, means having pleasing manners. People should feel comfortable talking to us again. Then and when the content is unfavorable, and unfavorable content has to be communicated pleasantly. Finally, it is hitam. That is, when we speak, it should benefit both the speaker and the listener. We should avoid negative talks. Observing the above 4 characteristics of good speech along with the study of the scriptures is considered to be verbal austerity or discipline. In the next slide, Krishna moves on to discuss the last one of the physical disciplines, which is mental discipline. Mental discipline is about training our mind to remain calm and to differentiate between the right and wrong. Different types of mental disciplines Krishna mentions to progress in the spiritual path are Mana Prasadaha, that is a quiet mind which is stress-free and strain-free. Saumyatvam, the gentleness of the thoughts, because thoughts alone get crystallized into words and actions, and it has a direct impact on verbal and physical disciplines as well. Then it is Maunam, In this context, it means mental silence, that is, freedom from unhealthy thoughts, just being aware of the thoughts and not judge them as good or bad. Atma Vinigraha is the next, means the direction of the thoughts, directing the thoughts in such a way that positive thoughts are encouraged and unhealthy thoughts are discouraged. In fact, disciplining the mind is disciplining the thoughts. Finally, it is Bhava Samshuddhi, which means purity of motive, freedom from hidden motive. Avoid expressing one motive outwardly, but having a hidden agenda within. When the threefold disciplines, that is, Kaika, Vachika, and Manasika tapas, is practiced by seekers, depending on the mode of the practice, Krishna categorizes them as Sattva, Rajas, Tamas tapas, or termed as Guna-based tapas. In the next slide, the following questions are addressed by Krishna in Guna-based tapas. That is, how does the individual practice it? What is their attitude towards these tapas? And how do they value the tapas? In the next slide, in Sattvic tapas, the individual is Paraya Shraddhaya, that is, has great reverence, has faith in the value of the disciplines, does not expect any result from the practice or not perceive it as a means for gaining something, and is Yuktaha, that is, one who has integrated the mind and intellect and is refined and is able to incorporate Trividam, the threefold disciplines, out of conviction with single-minded goal to contemplate on Brahman or the self, which is the ultimate reality or goal, under the guidance of the Guru and scriptures. In regards to the Rajasic tapas, it is the tapas that is practiced with a desire for materialistic benefits as the end goal for the sake of praise and glorification. Ultimately, any effort exercised towards materialistic goal will be adhruvam, that is temporary, and achalam, it is fleeting or perishable. In the tamasic tapas, the end goal is to cause great harm to others or to oneself. Individuals in the name of tapas are in delusion with false notion of tapas, that is, ignorant of the real reason to follow the tapas, which is discovering ultimate truth. They practice the disciplines with unhealthy, inferior resolve for revenge, destruction, and hence it consists of negative motive. There are several instances in Puranas, like for example Mahabharata, where tapas is done by people for the sake of destroying or taking revenge, and all this falls under tamasic tapas category. In the last slide, as I conclude the talk, I would like to end with a quote that aptly highlights the importance of the threefold disciplines. Sri Shankaracharya underlines the importance of tapas in his commentary on the Taittiriya Upanishad 3.1.1. Tapas is the best discipline of all the means that are causally related with definite ends. Tapas is known to be the best. Tapas involves control of the external and internal organs. In other words, tapas is the best means to accomplish anything. This applies to secular as well as spiritual life. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you, madam. So as we have seen, it is not enough just to have Shraddha, not enough just to do Yajna, Tapas. From this chapter, we come to know that we need to be careful so that my Shraddha, the Yajna, Tapas should be of the form of Sattvic, because these can be done for material end goals, and then it will become Rajasic or Tamasic, and it will not be the way of life to reach the goal of life. We'll now go to the last section that deals with Dhanam and an important explanation of an important mantra.
Thank you, sir. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We completed the study of three types of ahara, yajna, and tapas with the 19th verse. Now, the last item remaining is dhanam, as told by Krishna. Let us understand the three types of dhanam. As we go to the next slide, let us see what sattvika dhanam is. Yad dhanam diyate. When charity is made, datavyam iti. With the understanding of the importance of dhanam, its spiritual relevance, its importance in social harmony, with that understanding, voluntarily, without any external force or threat, and with maturity, anupakarine, even to a person who may not reciprocate my dhanam, who may not express gratitude, who may not be grateful to me in future. That means dhanam is an end in itself. It is not a means of future joy. Deshe kale patrecha, a gift given at the right place and at the right time when it is needed, and to the right and deserving person. If I do not have money for dhanam, I can give time, knowledge, and if nothing, a smile or empathy. Tad dhanam satvikam spritam. Such a dhanam is said to be sattvika dhanam. We'll go to rajasic dhanam in the next slide. In rajasic dhanam, the person is not mature enough to see the dhanam as an end in itself. He looks upon dhanam as a means for some other worldly benefit. Krishna says, doesn't matter. At least he looks upon it as a means. Therefore, he always expects something in return. Pratyupakarartham or phalam uddishya. He expects punyam for his dhanam. Therefore, phalam uddishyava, at least for the sake of punyam and better birth in the next janma. You do that dhanam, even though it is rajasic and inferior dhanam, and pariklishtam diyate, a dhanam which is given with reluctance. Tad dhanam rajasam spritam. Such a dhanam is called rajasic dhanam. Next slide will take us to tamasic dhanam. Yad dhanam diyate, that charity which is given adesha kale, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and apatrebhya, to a wrong person. Asat krutam, even when it is given to a deserving person, but by ill-treating or not respecting the person properly, and when the receiver is insulted, avagnatam, given with contempt. Tat tamasam udakrutam. Such a dhanam is tamasic dhanam. Next slide, sir. In the verses from 23 to 28, Krishna is introducing one more topic, the significance of Om Tat Sat. Krishna says, Brahmaji started his creation by uttering these namas of God, meaning Rakshakaha, protector, Aprameyaha, incomprehensible, and Nityaha or Shashvataha, eternal. Om Tat Saditi Nirdeshaha. So the word Om, Tat, and Sat, these three are Trividaha Nirdeshaha. The threefold nama, Nirdesha means Nama Brahman. Tena, with the help of these three namas or names, that is chanting these three names, Vihitas, three wonderful creations have been made. They are Yajnaha, means the wise way of life. Constructive way of using knowledge and power is called Yajna. Vedaha, the Vedic scriptures, which teaches the Yajna way of life. And Brahmanaha, who are preservers and promoters of Veda. And therefore, Om Tat Sat is a sacred mantra. Next slide, sir. Since Brahmaji initiated this tradition of utterance of Om Tat Sat, all the Brahmavadinam and Moksha Kankshibhihi, the Vedic followers, especially the spiritual seekers, Sadatam, always utter this mantra, Om Tat Sat, fully or partially, Kriyante and Pravartante, proceed with activities Vidhanoktaha, prescribed in the scriptures, meant for spiritual growth like Panchamahayagna, all types of dhanam and all types of tapas, anabhisandaya phalam, without expecting the result. Next slide, sir. In the two verses 26 and 27, Krishna gives 5 meanings of the word Sat. Sadbhave saditi etat pratyujyate. The word Sat is used in the meaning of nobility, goodness, good conduct, good behavior. Sadbhavaha is pure existence, eternal existence. Prashaste karmani, any good karma is also called Sat karma. Perseverance or commitment or willpower, sthitihi, with regard to the practice of 3 spiritual disciplines, yagne, tapasi, danecha. Karma chaiva tadarthiyam, any other activity which will promote yagna, danam, and tapas is called Sat karma. Iti abhidhiyate. These are the 5 meanings of word Sat. Thus, we have the tradition of chanting Om or Tat or Sat at the end of all rituals, by which all the activities will be transmuted to Sattvika spiritual karma. Next slide, sir. In this 28th verse, Krishna reminds us of Shraddha, which he spoke in the beginning of this chapter. He says, Ashraddha Hutam. Hutam means offered into the fire. Any oblation made without Shraddha, any spiritual activity or religious activity like Dattam, any charity made, Tapaha Taptam, any austerity practice, Yatcha Tatam, or any other, even worldly activities, including our profession, done without Shraddha, without sincerity, without devotion, all such karmas are called asat iti uchyate. And by practicing such asat karma, you will not get any material benefit nor spiritual benefit. Pretya na iha, neither in this life nor in paraloka. With this, Krishna concludes chapter 17. Om Tatsaditi Srimad Bhagavadgitasu Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Sambhade Shraddhatraya Vibhaga Yogo Nama Saptadashodhyayaha Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So this completes the description of 5 things that we practice routinely in our life, adhering to which we can change the way of life to the prescribed way of life, through which we get the prerequisites to take to the goal of life. Towards the end of this chapter, Pujya Swami Paramarthanandaji makes a note that although Lord Krishna described what is Daivi Sampat and what is Sattva Guna driven Shraddha, Ahara, Yajna, Tapas and Dhanam, these things which lead us to the correct way of life, leading us to the goal of life, there is no mention, curiously, of how to cultivate these virtues. So Pujya Swamiji says that from his vast reading of the scriptures, he has summarized in a kind of algorithm from simple to more difficult steps 5 things that we can inculcate in our daily life by which we can get the Daivi Sampat and cultivate good virtues. The first among them, Swamiji says, is prarthana or prayer. So during prayer, I pray to God to give me good virtues. The second way Swamiji says is that mere association with the Lord, who is an embodiment of good virtues, my mind gets imbibed of all the good virtues which belong to the Lord if I constantly think about him during my prayer. Second method Swamiji mentions is satsanga. While prarthana was association with God, satsang is association with the virtuous. The men with which I keep my association, I tend to imbibe the virtues which belong to them. In this context, Swamiji says that the Diksha, where we get an opportunity to go and meet the Swamijis, we come to see that they are so happy without any money, they are so happy without any comfort. So the wrong notion should then go from our mind that money leads to happiness or comfort leads to happiness. In this manner, I develop good virtues in a satsang. The third thing, little more difficult, is sankalpa or auto-suggestion. I know that I may not have some virtues. So Swamiji says that we should put effort, a conscious effort, to cultivate and nurture those positive virtues. So initially I am consciously doing, and then it becomes a way of life or it becomes natural to me. So Swamiji gives an example that I may be, when something good happens, I may be silent without voicing my opinion that he has done well, while I quickly point out if there has been a mistake by somebody. So I have to voluntarily, consciously cultivate and nurture this good virtue until it becomes natural to me. So this is autosuggestion or sankalpa. The next one is the opposite of this, which is pratipaksha bhavana. Now I may know that I have some negative virtues. So now I put a conscious effort to nurture, to cultivate a method whereby I convert that negative virtue into positive virtue. So I consciously try to look at every opportunity where there is hatred to love, where there is criticism to praise, where there is selfishness to selflessness. So this is pratipaksha bhavana. And lastly, the point Swamiji makes is vivekaha in this context means, have I invested myself to have emotional education? We spend a lot of time reading about how to maintain physical health, what kind of diet I should have. Have I made enough effort to know the causation, the course, and the consequence of various emotions? So we should know so that we can better control them. So these are the methods Swamiji prescribes to cultivate good virtues. Thereby, I can have the proper prescribed way of life, which will eventually lead me to the pinnacle, the goal of life, which was dealt with in the 13th, 14th, and 15th chapters. Thank you. Now, we will be a chanting of the Saraswati Dvadasha Stotram by Narayani.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Saraswati Tvayam Drishtva Veena Pustakadharini Hamsavaha Samayukta Vidyadanakari Mama Prathamam Bharati Nama Dvitiyam cha Saraswati Tritiyam Sharada Devi Chaturtham Hamsavahanam Panchamam Jagadikyatam Shashtam Vagishvari Tatha Kaumari Saptamam Proktam Ashtamam Brahmacharini Navamam Buddhidatri cha Dashamam Varadayini Ekadasham Shudraghanta Dvadasham Bhuvaneshwari Brahmi Dvadasha Namani Trisandhyam Yaf Pathe Naraha Sarvasiddhikari Tasya Prasanna Parameshwari Same Vasatu Jivagre Brahmarupa Saraswati Brahmarupa Saraswati Brahmarupa Saraswati Brahmarupa Saraswati. Dhanyavadam.
Thank you, Narayani, for your flawless chanting of the shloka, made famous by none other than Sri Vidishekara Bharati himself, with his sounds, rich voice. Thank you, all teachers, for a wonderful recap of chapter 17. Thank you, seekers, for your active participation. On Monday, 9th January 2023, let's log in for a new session 43 of Disha for the discovery of inner strength and happiness at 6:45 p.m. In this episode of Disha, we will continue study of 9th chapter along with Tattva Bodha topic on Bhakti is devotion to God. With this, let us conclude today's session with our usual Shanti mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.